Hello everyone again. We are starting now the next unit. We did finish in the previous one with the Rapid Integrated Assessment, the RIA. And to make a little bit the link between the previous one and this, I would like to make 2 or 3 initial remarks before I open the floor for George's presentation and then Maria Jose's. So the first reflection here to share is I hope we now are all familiar with the Rapid Integrated Assessment. We can see how to apply it, what its scope, when it is useful. And what we saw is that the RIA, which actually opens the discussion to further analyze the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, can work in several contexts. But one would be as a preparation for a MAPS mission, right? And we all know what a MAPS mission is. So let's say we have done a RIA, then we are receiving a MAPS mission in our country. This MAPS mission, as we will see, will use the common methodology, basic adaptation of the common methodology. Now that we will be familiar with the combo itself, we will see that it's not the entire methodology that we apply, it's only a small part of it. But still, we'll use the common methodology as the backbone of the MAPS mission. So that is one possible application. Now, that is not the only one, right? And we actually believe that that again might be a starting point, but you will see that in this training we are going much deeper into the combo application. So something to understand is, and this was a long internal discussion we had, combos are both an approach and a tool. And so it's composed of 5 or 6 different steps, considering there is step 0. So the initial 2 or 3 steps, including the 0, is the tool itself. And then if we add steps 3, 4, and 5, that's the approach. We will start today by the steps 0 and 1. We will have George and Maria Jose present steps 0 for George, Maria Jose 1. The one thing that I would like to say before we have these 2 presentations, which I think you will really enjoy, I find them really, really good, and I hope that will trigger an interesting discussion. But the first thing is to bear in mind is we will today discuss on how to identify or define the problem. And again, this is an important thing to take into consideration. The problem is not going to be one SDG. The SDGs are going to be embedded into the problem that we define. The problem is going to be something that's a priority for a country or a given territory or region. So we will say that to me, one of the biggest one of the most important characteristics of the combos is that it will help us localize the SDGs. I don't want to develop further this idea because I think the presentations will lead us in that path. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to George so that he can start the presentation, and then Maria Jose will complement with the next steps, so step 0 and step 1. Please, George. Again, thank you very much, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is George Gray Molina. It's a great pleasure to present this presentation on the Combos Toolkit. I'll be joined by my colleague, Maria Jose Abud, to talk about the Rapid Integrated Assessment and also about step 0 and 1 on the Combos Toolkit. So let's get started. What we'll be doing in this presentation is focus first on the idea of the combo approach, the importance, and why we think that it's an upgrade with respect to the gap-by-gap approach that we used to implement in the United Nations system and also at the UNDP. And second, we'll take a look at some of the steps of the cluster or combos approach. And these steps are based on results-based management. So we'll be walking you through what we believe are the 4 or 5 key steps to get this approach going on the ground. And finally, we'll review a little bit about what we've learned on Unit 3 with steps 0 and 1 of the combos approach. All right, let's get started. The importance of a combos approach. You may have seen this graph, this infographic. What we're trying to describe here is that rather than think of the SDG agenda as something that we can implement gap by gap, target by target, and rather than have 169 policies or 17 policies for our national development plan, what we should be thinking about is how to conserve the holistic approach, linking environmental, social, and economic dimensions into all of the ways in which we tackle hard exclusions, poverty, vulnerability, and the big challenges of each of our countries' development agenda. There are sort of two tensions in the SDG agenda at present. One of the tensions is the one that leads us towards fragmentation and sort of to scatter and fragment the agenda into hundreds of targets with different interventions. And we think that although we'll be collecting data and statistics on perhaps all of the 169 targets and maybe 231 of the indicators for these targets, we shouldn't be developing so many policies. We should be developing perhaps 3 or 4 combo-based policies or cluster-based policies that strike at the structural issues, the obstacles to development in each of our countries. The second temptation or tension has to do with cherry picking, and rather than just pick the education SDG or just pick the gender SDG or just pick the one that links to employment, we think that we should be thinking of all of those together. Now think of the youth employment challenges in any one of our countries that should involve both education, labor force skills, and also a life cycle approach to the way we deal with social policy and social protection. So these are some of the lessons learned from the transition to MDGs to SDGs. Our approach is based on the simple idea that most development problems are complex, are multidimensional, so we should probably be thinking about them in that way as well, and we should be tackling them with an intersectoral approach in a way that delivers a bigger bang for the scarce fiscal, institution, and policy resources that we have. A starting point for most of our analysis is to understand what the low-hanging fruit is. And for our purposes, much of the low-hanging fruit is what can be achieved when we have high levels of economic growth in each of our countries. So many social, environmental, and economic indicators are correlated with economic growth. We call that the low-hanging fruit agenda. This means this is a good thing that when dynamic labor forces create employment and they create opportunities for larger portions of the population, this is a good agenda. But on the SDG front, what we would like to do is focus mostly on the high-hanging fruit, on those issues that are not definitely correlated with economic growth and that require interventions in order to take together or put together an agenda that pushes forward either a pro-poor focus, something that supports biodiversity, something that supports youth employment, something that helps us with vulnerability to natural disasters, and other issues that are not necessarily correlated with economic growth. So we invite you to take a look at that. Over the past 10 years, what we've learned in most of the region is that we're no longer just based on a very simple policy architecture that used to be based just on economic growth and some conditional cash transfers. That was the state of the art until about 10 or 5 years ago. But over the past 5 years, what we've found are these 4 elements that sort of describe the new policy architecture and the new state of the art in much of the region. First is much more intersectoral coordination, meaning ministries of education, of housing, of infrastructure, of health, focusing on parts of the territory or groups of the population in a way that is harmonious, that focuses on intersectoral impact. Second, much more territorial articulation between national governments and parishes or municipal governments at the local level. Third, much more of a focus on the life cycle of people, starting with infant care and malnutrition, and then focusing on keeping kids in school, preventing all sorts of issues during the first few years of labor force participation, and then also thinking about the later years, non-contributory pensions and social protection along the life cycle. Finally, there's been a lot more citizen participation in our countries. A lot of this has to do with new technologies. Think of the impact of Facebook and Twitter just on disseminating information, data, census results, household survey results, and all sorts of information that might be of interest, but also keep policymakers accountable on the impact of our policies. All of our approach is based on the idea that we should be looking not just at deprivation and not just on poverty, but also on opportunities and also on well-being and thinking about progress over time. So what you're seeing here is a graphic representation of what we call three types of baskets. The first set of baskets on the bottom is a basket of multidimensional poverty. We're familiar with these from work done by UNDP and also the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative in much of the region. Second, we know that there's incipient work on what we call vulnerability or multidimensional resilience, in which we focus on labor markets, on social protection, on access to assets, on systems of care. And this is mostly focused on middle class and vulnerable populations that may not be poor any longer, but still are very fragile and vulnerable to risks coming from sickness, from natural disasters, or just from economic downturns. So that's much of the focus of the 2016 Multidimensional Progress Report. And finally, the top baskets in this graph are what we call multidimensional sustainability baskets. And it's all about changing the pattern of development and consumption and production patterns over time, which involves the climate change agreement in Paris in sticking to the emissions objectives that 193 countries agreed to, but also thinking about how we make changes over our life cycle in the economic system, in upgrading technologies, in creating energy sources that are renewable. So as we think of these three baskets, we have deprivations on the bottom and poverty on the bottom. We have vulnerability and fragilities in the middle, and then sustainability on the top. And for us at UNDP, these three baskets together make up what we call an agenda of multidimensional progress. A very important thing that's happened, innovation that's happened around the region, is that there is a data revolution that has to do with vulnerability and with poverty. And this data revolution means moving away from just using census data to starting to use administrative registries and cadasters and ways of georeferencing households family by family in each of our countries. There's some very interesting examples coming from countries like Brazil, who started this about 15 years ago, running through Colombia, which has a fantastic program that creates policy based on capturing administrative registries in a multidimensional fashion. And other countries like Dominican Republic or Honduras that have made tremendous inroads over the past 2 or 3 years in creating administrative records from scratch, from zero up, and now we have millions of people that are registered. These are people in conditions of vulnerability or poverty, and we can track these over time. We can build panels of data for hundreds of thousands of people in our countries. This data revolution is very important because it allows us to create a new type of social policy and economic policy that is targeted and that speaks to both deprivations and also to opportunities, household by household. Let me share some of the examples that we've seen of the combo approach in the region, perhaps the most important one over the past few years.
Thank you.
Let me share some of the examples that we've seen of the combo approach in the region. Perhaps the most important one over the past few years is what we have learned from El Salvador. They focused a lot of their energies on a citizen security program. The plan is called El Salvador Seguro, and this plan is a multidimensional intervention in a number of municipalities or parishes in El Salvador. And what they do is they recognize that an issue like citizen security is not a silver bullet issue, not something that we can solve through police action or just a single intervention, but something that can be tackled with many interventions, including thinking about youth at risk, labor market, support for youth unemployment, thinking about access to education, thinking about access or changes in urbanization and the way we create public spaces in our towns, in our municipalities, in our parishes, thinking about access to justice and other elements that might be useful in a more human-centered approach to citizen security. So what El Salvador showed us in this plan is that you can move parish by parish, municipality by municipality, in a social dialogue, identifying what are the key issues for youth at risk. And these interventions are multidimensional. So that's where we have learned from the combo approach and how effective it can be at the local level in creating an impact against violence in this case. In other countries, we've worked on issues such as malnutrition, teenage pregnancy, or extreme poverty. An exercise that we did in Argentina, focusing on 5 northern provinces, is to think about the multidimensional interventions needed for a teenage pregnancy combo in these provinces. And what we found is that likely interventions would focus first on girls from 13 to 15, and then on adolescents and teenagers from 15 to 17, with different kinds of interventions on both health and reproductive, sexual education and health services, but also on human rights and prosecution in some cases, and access to police and justice. So what we see is a combo of interventions that will help inform the citizenry and also youth in these decisions. One very interesting combo that we've been developing over the past few months is coming from Honduras. As just to remind you, all of these approaches, all the combo approaches are happening as we speak in real time. We have interesting examples in Mexico, in Honduras, in Peru, in many countries. And what we think is most interesting is just start to gather some of the best cases, but interesting cases to illustrate what we can do in each one of our countries. In Honduras, we're focusing on malnutrition with a program, which is a multidimensional program called Vida Mejor, and it focuses on peasant communities in the southern part of the country. This is a country, this is a region rather, that has some of the highest rates of infant mortality of Latin America and the Caribbean. It's a place where there's very little access to water and health services. So the intervention that we're putting together with the government and the UN agencies is a multidimensional intervention. It spans children's care, work with women's organizations, work with campesino and peasant organizations, and thinking about what do we need to move the dial on multidimensional child nutrition. So let's think briefly about the steps of a combos approach. We learned a lot from examples on the ground, and we've put together our own 5-step system. We can think of this as results-based management kind of agenda, in which the focus is on a multidimensional problem, and that's where perhaps it's different from other approaches that probably focus on a single gap. The first step is to think about, step 0 is to adopt a combo approach, thinking about this vis-a-vis the gap approach. Step 1 is defining the problem in a multidimensional way and not in a silo way, not in a sectoral way that is bureaucratic. Step 2 is starting to develop a theory of change which involves both consequences, effects and consequences of our interventions, and thinking about a roadmap for interventions for these issues and implementation and monitoring and evaluation. In each country, these will be done differently. There's different availability of data and also different capabilities on the ground. I think one of the things that I've learned over the past few months, working with many governments on this, is that there has to be a strong agreement on what the problem is. And that agreement is a social definition of a problem. Something not just a group of technocrats dreams up together, but something that the population can share and say, yes, that's a problem in my parish, in my municipality, and where I live. It's not just something that a technocrat has seen on a household survey. So that's I think those 2 steps, both the evidence-based approach, which is technocratic, and which we do as well, and also the social dialogue approach of asking what people think about what are the issues that drive their daily lives. I think both of these approaches are powerful and allow us to do a lot. And then finally, we invite you to take a look at the kinds of things that the UN system does on the SDG agenda. You can see there's a lot of these on this graph. The MAPS approach is sort of the umbrella approach, the mainstreaming, acceleration, and policy support. We think that the combo approach is our contribution to the acceleration agenda. So we invite countries and governments and civil society to think about the 2 or 3 issues that require acceleration because we're stuck. It's something that we haven't been able to solve with economic growth. We haven't even been able to tackle with existing policies. So let's focus on those difficult issues like violence, like citizen security, like child malnutrition, like extreme poverty, and so on. For the purposes of these sessions, Unit 3 of this course, we'll be focusing on Step 0, Step 1. Unit 4 will focus on development of theories of change. And then Unit 5 will pick up on the roadmap, on implementation, and on monitoring and evaluation. So let's briefly talk about Step 0, Step 1 of the approach. I think the important thing about Step 0 is to think about each of the targets in each of the SDGs as involving the 3 dimensions of this agenda. Each one of these, as you can see in this graph. So let's briefly talk about Step 0, Step 1 of the approach. I think the important thing about Step 0 is to think about each of the targets in each of the SDGs as involving the 3 dimensions of this agenda. Each one of these, as you can see in this graph, this is work done analytically by our colleagues in the UN system, has an environmental agenda, has a social, has an economic in each one of those targets. When you think about poverty eradication, we're talking about access to natural resources, we're talking about sustainable livelihoods, we're also talking about economic, labor market forces, and of course, social protection and social policy. So we have, in each one of these targets, we'll have a mix of dimensions. When we first started thinking about the Combos approach, what we wanted to do is look at it side by side with what we used to do. And on the left, you see the GAP approach. On the right, you see the Combo approach. The GAP approach is what the UNDP has been doing for the Millennium Development Goals agenda, the MDG agenda. We would focus on education goals separate from the health goals and those separate from the gender goals. And we would try to look at the obstacles and try to move the needle and move the dial on each one of these. But quickly, over the past 5 years, what we've learned is that that's not good enough, and that most issues are multidimensional. Most issues do not involve the single sector, but rather involve many types of interventions. So if you will, take a look at the right side graph. The Combo approach has sort of 2 key elements, which the first one is a zoom on territory, on parishes, on municipalities, on thinking of those parts on the map that are red, meaning that we have deprivations, that we have violence, that we have malnutrition, that we have teenage pregnancy, or we have issues that are not solved by more of the same. And the second aspect that's very important is that we zoom into not just the territory, but also to an age group. When we think about teenage pregnancy, it'll be girls and adolescents from 13 to 17 years of age. When we think about youth at risk or citizen security, like the El Salvador case, it's young men from ages 15 to 25. And when we think about extreme poverty, it's usually women and children that we're focusing on first, thinking about the household, nutrition, and so on. So we invite you to think about this in those very strong dimensions, a target population and a target territory. So that's a way of thinking about this approach, is thinking about zooming onto your map and focusing on the red areas on the map. That's what we want to do with the Combo approach. We're going for the high-hanging fruit rather than the low-hanging fruit. The second thing is that as we look at the finances and fiscal space, what we have found over time is that the gap-by-gap approach tends to duplicate and fragment and disperse resources. So many of our education and health and even housing ministries have programs, for example, for youth or for women. And what we would like to do is we would like to coalesce that critical mass of resources for women and for youth and use those in a multidimensional fashion. so that they're not divided or fragmented by projects and programs, but that they actually create a critical mass of interventions on a territory or on a group of the population. So the Combos approach tries to do is find fiscal space for our interventions. We have a fiscal toolkit for that purpose that we think can allow us to both look at space for transfers, for subsidies, and also look at taxes and how those three work together over the impact of both fiscal impact on households, and also thinking about how we can avoid duplication of resources from different programs. Third, what we think is very important, something that I already talked about briefly, is to take advantage of the data revolution. And this means not just using census or household survey data, but jumping into the 21st century and starting to create geo-referenced dashboards that pick up administrative registries and in which we could do a survey across our whole country, and we could focus on thinking about countries like Dominican Republic that have a panel of data of 3 or 4 million people in real time. Small countries like Honduras that have 4 million people in a panel today. Large countries like Brazil follow 70 million people with administrative registries that are geo-referenced today. So what we think we need to do is move away from a fragmented and dispersed sector by sector household survey census approach and focus more on how to build a system that uses the power of information technologies, tablets, Android phones, iPhones, and so on, and builds a dashboard that's available not just for the government, but also for civil society to look at. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over here to my colleague, Maria Jose Abud, who's going to be running through you with step 0 and steps 1 on the Combo approach.
Hello everyone. Just before Maria Jose starts her presentation, a small comment here. In case you have questions that you would like to advance, please feel free to write them down. We are going to take note. As Maria Jose finishes, we will go through the questions. So should you have any question, please feel free to write it down. If you want to make the question with the mic at the end of Maria Jose's presentation, feel free also to ask for the mic and we will open it so that you can make the question. Thank you, Maria Jose.
Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you, George, for your presentation. I'm on slide 20. I don't know if you can see the presentation right now. I'm going to continue from slide 20. So just to resume what George just said, what we want to achieve on step 0 is to understand the importance of and usefulness of moving from a silos-based approach to an integrated approach to address the 2030 agenda. So what we want to do and we want to achieve from this step is to be able to make all the people that is involved on the combo strategy that we need to be able to achieve a strategy that consider all the dimensions that are part of progress of people. So this information, you can find it in the materials of Unit 3, where we suggest some activities and some deliverables for finishing the step 0. So now I will move on step 1. Our first step is about the problem definition based on country priority. Here the main message is that we don't want to impose a plan of action. What we want is that priorities must emerge from each government, and more than each government, from each country needs. We want to support the current country development agenda, and we think that one starting point can be the long-term vision of each country, their development plan, and this kind of document can be really useful to start planning, which is one of the priorities in terms of development, and which is one area that is important to support in order to achieve a multidimensional progress. Where the Combos approach is implemented within a MAPS mission or the implementation of the RIA will provide important inputs to the identification of priority of the combos. This is very important, and as Alejandro explained at the beginning, sometimes can be a little confusing when and how we use these different tools for landing the Agenda 2030, but the combo can be involved and can come part and can be a result of. Okay, so as I was saying, we need to consider all those actors that are part in the problem, but this does not mean that we will consider those actors that have a great influence and power in the problem. We must be able to consider to create our combo strategy those population that sometimes have not influence, have not power, but they are very affected by the social or so to the development problem that we are facing. So a question that always is done is which is the scope of the combo and what kind of population we want to reach. So as the problem definition, the scope of the combo depends of the kind of problem and it depends of each country context. The combo approach can be implemented at the national, regional, or municipality level. It can be also only for rural population, for example, can address a specific group. For example, in Honduras, as George was explaining, we have a child malnutrition combo for a specific region, a very poor region of Honduras. Also, it can be the case that the combos is focused on employment for indigenous and Afro-descendant women. A combo can address a problem that affect a large part of the population. For example, it can be a combo for environmental pollution, or it can be a problem that affects a very particular location. For example, we can create a combo for vulnerability to natural disaster in a specific city. So the scope of the combo, it depends of the resources available, it depends of its government willing, it depends of country context and their special needs. And as I was saying, for the definition of the problem, it's necessary to consider all those actors that are involved and to position the problem in the public policy agenda. This includes different actors, for example, the media. The media of each country is very important to position the problem and have a great influence and power to put in the agenda some social issues. So it is important once we are in this stage to analyze which is the position of the media, the local media, for this problem. Also, it's important to consider all strategic actors and stakeholders, as for example, which is the role of the public sector, the private sector, which NGOs are involved in the problem, which international organizations have done some intervention or have done some different strategies to tackle this problem, and also to understand which is the population that is affected and which is the level of power and influence that they have. Also, it's important to consider those catalyst events. These are events that occur that we didn't expect to occur in a country, but they have a great power and influence to put some social problem in the agenda. For example, an earthquake can be a situation that it wasn't planned, but have the power to focus attention on a specific location in a country, on a specific social problem. So we have to consider also how the catalyst event can influence negative or positive our combo strategy. Also, it's important to consider the state response capacity. Our problem, the definition of our combo must be realistic to the current resources that the local government have and their current interest, because we don't want to present a strategy that can be too much for a government, that can be too much for their local resources, because this will affect negatively the development of the combo. And finally, we consider important to consider into the analysis the political electoral cycles. As you know, it's very important if a year there is a change of government, which is the interest of the local municipal governments and what are their own agendas, because these can be very determinant to approve some strategies, to approve some interventions. So we must consider this the political context. So, which is the summary of step 1. You also have this information in the contents of unit 3, but what we want to do is to be able to, through a participatory process, to create and define which is the problem that we want to tackle and is going to be the center of our combo strategy. Here we suggest some activities to do and some deliverables to create in order to conclude the step 1, but the main message is that, as I said, and as George also said, that the problem that the combo will focus must emerge and must be part of each country context. We don't want to impose a plan of action. We don't want to bring to countries and a specific agenda. What we want is to create a strategy around their own social problems. So that was the overview of Unit 3, which is mainly about how to land the combo approach in each country and how to define the problem that the combo is going to approach. And in the next unit, we're going to go deeply into the construction of the theory of change, into the quantitative analysis, into the construction of the dialogue, and also we'll go into the how we should map our combo strategy with the Agenda 2030. And in the final unit, we will go through the combo implementation and also about all the monitoring and evaluation system that we should have for the combo strategy. And also, now we will go through the homework of this unit. I understand that you have until July 31 to complete the homework. And what we want to achieve from this homework and the homework that you will have to do for Unit 4 and 5 is that you put in practice what we have been studying, and you will be you have to be able to construct an hypothetical combo based on a public policy problem that affects a country, any country of the region. It can be the country that you currently are living. It can be a country that you know because you have worked on it, but any country of the region that where you are able to identify a specific problem that is affecting a specific population. So We want you to identify this problem and to be very, to bring us a lot of details of which is the specific population affected by this problem, why this situation is a problem, and why it will generate interest of authorities to be solved. Also, it's important to define the scope of this combo strategy. For example, it has a national scope, regional, municipal, to be very specific about which is the population that we want to achieve. And finally, to identify and describe 3 strategic actors or stakeholders that are part of this problem and are very important for the combo strategy. So that is all. Thank you very much. I don't know if there are any questions about the presentation or about any topic of the course.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose. Let me add a few words here, a few closing remarks while people start to write the questions. Please feel free to write the questions, and again, in case you want to have your mic open, please let us know and we will open the mic so that you can rather make the question verbally. So a couple of important things that I would like to share in these closing remarks. And first, I'm choosing this word very carefully and I'm being provocative on purpose to see what the reactions are, but I believe that the proposal that we are hearing here, this first step 0 and 1, we believe that this is a revolution. And again, the word is carefully chosen. Many of you attending today, you work and live in Caribbean countries, and we have heard and learned and suffered the very limited access to data in the Caribbean, right? Which has been an impediment in many cases to actually orientate some evidence-based policies. So let me give you an example on how these data challenges can be to some extent solved nowadays with new technologies. So as we were hearing from George, we can of course use census, which are available every about 10 years, use household surveys, which depending on the country, but let's say they are available every 2 years, but don't have the possibility to give us information specifically in territories, etc., due to representativity. But we can use administrative data. And administrative data is something that can be built quite quickly and has a wealth of depth and detail that is amazing. So one of the most extreme cases that I could share is Haiti after the earthquake. The neighborhoods that were destroyed by the earthquake in Port-au-Prince, there was no data at all. And so we did adopt technology available by Google. It's called ODK, and this is free, and you can actually adapt it to your own servers. And with that, and some few enquêteurs, surveyors that we trained, 13 we had, in 1 month we could have 30,000 points GIS reference. So we could actually have very detailed information about the households, about the public spaces, about the small businesses. And this you can actually reiterate with the frequency, with quite a good frequency, at a very, very modest cost. So this is a revolution in terms of data gathering, in terms of data analysis, in terms of decision making. Well, what we are proposing with the combos, which by the way, I recommend to use innovation in data as well, is also a revolution. Why? Because we usually tend to try to solve problems in a rather unidimensional or sectoral way, right? So we would rather just think of citizen security from a traditional perspective of reinforcement of security, or we would rather think of education just as education itself, right? Now, if we follow this thought of education and we go back to the HDR report, we know education is good in itself, but most of the cases, and that is confirmed by the focus groups that we've done in 20 countries in the region to over 2,000 people, education is also seen as a mean to an end, right? As a means to an end, as a way to actually find better opportunities. Now, we cannot, in that case, just think of education for the sake of education, right? Education is linked to many other dimensions. Citizen security is also linked to many other dimensions. How do we do a multidimensional analysis of the challenge that we are trying to face? I mean, if we are thinking of how to improve education, it has to be linked to labor markets, it has to be linked to culture, it has to be linked to the living conditions of people and what are the challenges for them to actually access properly education and have equal opportunities. So when we start to think of any given problem from a multidimensional perspective, then we are able to start to build a combo. Now we have to dimension this or frame this and see who are the actors, as Maria Jose was saying. So before I go much further into this, because I wouldn't like to further go into the next unit, which is going to be about building the theory of change, but I would like to advance one idea, which is the process, and we are convinced of this, and more often than not we don't do it, so this is important to stop and think about it. The process is iterative. So we are now defining the problem. It will not stop here. As we start to build the theory of change, we may want to revisit the problem that we have defined. But the first thing is definition of the problem. Maria Jose was saying it will include perception and it will include data. It has to be as, I will go now to your question, Patrick. Please feel free to put the questions there and we will go and answer them. So the definition of the problem needs to be representative. Let's take this into account. The exercise that we are recommending now for this first session is an exercise where you will be defining the problem. You can define the problem of the countries you live in, the problems of the country where you are working at, the problem of a country, but you can also define the problem rather of a country, of a specific region, of a city, of an area. And what will be extremely important in this exercise, and we will be looking at it very carefully, is who do you consider have to be part of the definition of the problem? Who are sitting at that table? The concept of participatory decision making or inclusive decision making, it is so important to see who's sitting at the table, and as important as who's sitting at the table is who is not sitting at the table. When we did this exercise 1 year ago to see what were the reaction of government officials and UNDP officials, we started to see precisely that. What was our tendency? Who were we usually leaving out of the table? So please take this into account. If you have the opportunity and you can invite other people to do this exercise with you, it will be extremely rich. If you cannot and you have to just imagine that you have other people, then go ahead and do it on your own. But this exercise, what we are recommending here through the training of combos is that you actually initiate what a combo could be. All the work that you initiate now, I'm sure it's going to work for a combo that we will sooner than later be doing in your respective countries, or your governments will be doing, or UNDP will be supporting. So don't think of this as a theoretical exercise. Think of this as a very practical exercise. I would like to really give two examples, but I'm going to stop in the first one, and if there is interest, we can go to the second one. So the first one is in Colombia. There was, and to some extent there is today, but there was in Colombia a huge problem of citizen security. So what is the scope? How do we address this problem? And we could actually think of Colombia as an entire country and then think of all the dimensions of citizen security in the entire country, every region, etc. But we could also go deeper into the analysis. So let's take Medellin. Medellin, if you think on in terms of homicide rate per 100,000 inhabitants, Medellin had the highest rate of the world. So it was 226 or 246 homicides every 100,000 inhabitants. So we are starting to putting some limits to the analysis. Now we are not in entire Colombia, we're in Medellin. Now we start to see how the government of Medellin at the time, Fajardo's government, how did they solve or really seriously advance the challenge of citizen security? They did not just go into a traditional approach of policemen and judiciary. They actually did an amazing, inclusive public investment process where their slogan was the best for the poor. You could agree or not, but the best for the poor. And so they started a massive program of public investment, of social cohesion, of inclusion, of making sure that precarious neighborhoods had proper access. They started to see which were the priorities in those neighborhoods. And at the end of the intervention, which also had a very important analysis in terms of policemen and judiciary and intelligence, etc., at the end of the intervention, and the budget was really significant, the homicide rates dropped from 246 to 20, bringing it really, really low for our average in the region. So that's an excellent, I could consider, example. At the time, SDGs did not exist and no one called this a combo, but it's an excellent example of how an intersectoral approach can have impacts, and we can put it at a local level, but the impacts are national and actually have a representativity at the regional level. So I wouldn't like to go further into other examples. I think at least here we have a couple of questions and not much more time. So let me first go to Patrick's question. Patrick, the HDRO uses periodic household surveys to compute the MPI. However, the Combos approach is proposing use of innovation data in generation, greater flexibility and adaptability. How do we assure the power of comparison across localities for the same issue, child nutrition, when using the innovation data approach? So before I answer, because I've spoken more than I wanted, Maria Jose, would you like to take this first question?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Patrick, for your question. I think that, as you said, the combo approach want to look to different kind of data, innovative data, but also, of course, we are using the traditional and the current data available. And for example, when we are, if we are in the topic of child nutrition, we will look to the MPI, we will look to the current index available. But what we want to see, what we want to push in the creation of the combo strategy is that for some populations there is not that available, and to capture some specific dimensions of a problem, there are not any kind of data. So, for example, maybe you can have in the MPI the national nutrition index, but you don't have the rural, or you don't have a specific index for a specific location, or you don't have this index by gender. So what we want to do, and what we mean with innovative data, is to be able to go further and try to think about different sources and different ways to capture some of these dimensions that are not captured by traditional data. And these include also to, for example, think about qualitative research, to think about focus group, to think about the creation of new surveys in order to be able to capture the dimensions that are not in data. But as you ask, how we combine how these two kind of data, traditional and non-traditional data, works. We will look, and you will see in the next unit where we go deeply in the quantitative analysis. You will see that we also look to traditional data.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Thank you very much. So I hope, Patrick, please let us know if you feel the question was properly answered. Maria Jose is somehow explaining how different types of data are complementary. So we are not saying one rather than the other, but we are saying that it is also a very good moment to actually make use and take advantage of the possibilities we have nowadays. Now, the second question, Doreen, I'm glad you feel I responded to it. Let me just add a little bit more there. And I think this clarification is important. What we are saying here is we don't believe that governments should and could set aside their national priorities, or local governments their local priorities, and put in the center of their analysis the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets and the 232 indicators and increasing. That is not realistic, and that's not recommendable either. Rather than that, what we are saying is they are not dissociated, national priorities and SDGs, or local priorities and SDGs, or a narrow combo and SDGs. So what we could see, right, in the citizen security example, we could see that if we keep going deeper there, we will meet at least 6 or 7 SDGs. And actually what we will meet is their corresponding targets and mainly the indicators. So by following such an inclusive intervention as the one example in Medellin for citizen security, we will be able to report in 6 or 7 SDGs or their respective indicators. And actually, again, as I said, at that time the SDGs didn't exist, but now they do. So they will maybe, and only maybe, but we believe it will happen, they will help governments and actors participating in the definition of the problem and the solution. They will help them to consider additional dimensions and maybe additional interventions that will help better solve that problem. So again, if I were to give another example, and I will not go deep into that unless you ask for it, but in Haiti after the earthquake, there was a temptation to actually go for the easy solution, which was after the earthquake you had 1.5 million people living in tents in Haiti, 15% of the population. You had a stronger earthquake in Chile and in Japan. In Chile, it generated less than 1,000 deaths. In Japan, 8 or 9. In Haiti, 200,000 to 300,000 deaths and 1.5 million people displaced. So, do you think the earthquake and the people displaced was the problem? No, that was the symptom. The problem was much deeper than that, right? So the temptation is to actually help people in the return process. But that would not solve the problem. That would actually hide it, right? Because the problem is that there are about 5 to 7 million people living in poverty conditions in precarious neighborhoods. So when you start to look at the problem through these lenses, you start to see that the intervention needs to be multidimensional. And you start to work, in the case of Haiti, we started by 16 and in depth by 8 precarious neighborhoods, 144,000 living in these neighborhoods, with a methodology that a scope that you could actually achieve results and you could replicate neighborhood by neighborhood. And when you look at this kind of intervention, then you are not just sending people back to invisible poverty, you're actually changing the living condition in these neighborhoods, right? So you could think rather on housing conditions, but you could think on public investments. You will start to analyze public lighting and its implications in terms of citizen security and access to spot at night to continue education. You will be thinking on urban participatory planning, participatory budgeting. You will be thinking on connectivity. You will be thinking on roads. You will be thinking of inclusive economic growth. So when you start to think it in this in this logic, then again, you can follow your interventions and you can match them against the targets and you can see which indicators are impacted. And then this becomes a way where you have to articulate horizontally and vertically in a territory multiple interventions that need a proper planning and sequencing, right? So that's when I'm saying we are here proposing a revolution in the kind of way to intervene. So we will go deeper into this in the next unit, but this is just to hopefully open the appetite. Should there be any additional questions, please feel free to ask for the mic. And if not, I don't know, Maria Jose, if you have anything else you would like to complement.
Thank you, Alejandro. Just to say that you were talking about this, how the Agenda 2030 and the combos can be combined, and Doreen have a question about that. And just to add that we want to cover the 17 SDG and the 169 targets, but we think that the best or a great way to approach the Agenda 2030 is to start from a specific problem, and then, as Alejandro said, we will find out how this problem is achieving a different numbers of SDGs, and that we will do in the next unit. We will map our combo with Agenda 2030 in order to show how, if we are able to construct a strategy that includes all the multiple dimensions that are part of the problem, we are also achieving an important part of the Agenda 2030.
Thank you, Maria Jose. I think that hopefully helped clarify what we're trying to say here. Yeah, Geraldine agrees with that. So, again, we are leaving it here now. Please be as practical as possible with this first task of this module. Think of the problem you would like to solve. Maybe it's a problem that it's been there for a long time, and maybe you think that it has a potential different solution. Think on who would you invite to that discussion. Think of what could be catalytic to actually have a different approach. Think on, start by those thoughts, and as we advance with the combos, we will keep going deeper into that problem that each of you have defined. And if you have the chance to invite other people to have those discussions with you, I'm sure it will be a very enriching process. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and we will see each other soon. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Bye.